across England, Wales, central and southern Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland. Turns milder, but it will be windy.
We've got a big Saturday for you on GB News. From 6 a.m, it's breakfast with Stephen and Anne. At 10, join Esther and Philip for the Saturday selection. Alistair, Darren and Nana take you through the day. And don't miss Neil Oliver Live at 7 p.m. At 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight, followed by Headliners. That's Saturday on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome to your Friday edition of On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you to beat the squeeze. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour here on GB News, television and DAB plus digital radio, we're talking about those spiralling energy prices for both households and firms. How can we keep the home fires burning as fuel bills rise? Plus, inflation in the US hits a 40-year high. Are those price pressures and higher interest rates set to cross the pond? All that, plus an update on the UK's business climate from Manchester's favourite taxi driver. On the Money, after the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Good afternoon, it's 1 o'clock. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. The Home Secretary says the next Metropolitan Police Commissioner faces stark challenges. That's as she begins the process of choosing Dame Cressida Dick's replacement. Priti Patel says the culture at the force and the behaviour of its officers needs an overhaul by a new leader. Dame Cressida announced her departure yesterday after losing the confidence of the London mayor in the wake of a series of scandals. Former Scotland Yard detective Peter Blexley told GB News Dame Cressida's position had become untenable.
there's lessons to be learnt here by the next incoming commissioner, because, of course, Cressida Dick's refusal to investigate the Downing Street allegations in the first instance made her look like a political pawn. Whether she was or not is irrelevant. That was the perception that so many people had. Policing and politics needs to be kept apart as much as it possibly can, because when police do politics, they get it wrong.
The Defence Secretary is meeting his Russian counterpart in Moscow today. Earlier, Ben Wallace laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. He's hoping to make clear that Russia invading Ukraine would be a lose-lose situation. The Kremlin has insisted it has no plans to attack, but NATO's alarmed by the build-up of more than 100,000 troops on the border. Meanwhile, President Biden is urging US citizens to leave Ukraine immediately. The president's confirmed he won't send troops to rescue Americans if Russia invades. Mr. Biden's warned things could go crazy quickly in the region. The Labour MP Neil Coyle has had the party whip suspended after allegedly making racist comments to a journalist. The Bermondsey and Old Southwark MP is accused of using offensive language towards British Chinese reporter Henry Dyer in a bar in the House of Commons. Mr. Coyle has apologised to everyone involved. The UK economy grew by a record 7.5% in 2021, following a large fall the year before due to the pandemic. Official figures show GDP grew by 1% in the final quarter last year. That's despite the impact of the Omicron COVID variant in December. GDP is still 0.4% lower, though, than pre-pandemic levels. Economists are warning inflation and tax rises could dampen confidence in the coming months. Spain has dropped its entry requirement for British children over the age of 12 to be fully vaccinated. They'll now only have to provide proof of a recent negative test. Meanwhile, fully vaccinated passengers will no longer need to take a COVID-19 test when arriving in the UK. Unvaccinated travellers will still have to take tests but won't have to self-isolate. Transport Minister Robert Court says the government wants to take the trouble out of the travel.
This is critically important for people who are looking to get away, families at half term, for example, but also for those whose businesses operate abroad or who need to look to get people coming to this country for work. And critically, of course, all those people, and there's thousands of them, who have friends and family abroad or want friends and family to visit them here. So it's been a very challenging time for all of those people, not least all of those working in the travel sector. And this is a big step forward today.
Wales will scrap COVID passes and the need to wear face masks in certain venues later this month. Economy Minister Vaughan Gething has been giving a briefing on the changes. First Minister Mark Drakeford, who's tested positive for COVID, says vaccination levels and decreasing case numbers means Wales can look to brighter times ahead. Almost 1.5 billion fewer pints were sold in pubs in 2021 in comparison to 2019. That's according to the British Beer and Pub Association. They're down 38% from pre-pandemic levels as people opted for wine and spirits during lockdown. The association says the shift is due to long periods in restricted pub trading and a rise in drinking at home. And koalas have been officially listed as endangered along much of Australia's east coast. Their population has fallen around 30% compared with 3 years ago due to droughts, bushfires and land clearing. The Australian Koala Foundation estimates there are fewer than 58,000 koalas left in the country. Scientists have warned that the iconic mammal could become extinct. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, but now let's return to Liam and On the Money.
And coming up on the money today, energy bills already sky high are set to rocket in April. What can you do to cope? On the Money's on your side, giving both households and firms tips and ideas to help you beat the squeeze. We head for Manchester and call a cabbie John Constantine making his return to On the Money. How are taxi drivers coping with rising petrol and diesel bills? And what's the mood in the capital of the North as the cost of living crisis bites? That's later in the show. As ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. Are you concerned about rising fuel bills? About heating your home or your business going bust? Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. I'll read out some of your messages later in the show, so stay with us. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan. You're on the money. Now, everybody knows energy's getting a lot more expensive. Across the world, wholesale oil and gas prices have been spiralling as the post-lockdown economy has sprung back into life. That's sending gas and electricity bills paid by UK households and businesses through the roof, with fuel costs now at the heart of this cost of living crisis. Last week, energy regulator Ofcom raised the price cap for household fuel bills, reflecting spiralling wholesale costs. Since last October, the average household fuel bill has been capped at £1,277. That cap rises to £1,970 in April, a huge 54% increase, affecting 22 million households. Now remember, this cap refers to the average household bill. Use more energy than average, and your provider will charge you more. In response to this higher cap, Chancellor Rishi Sunak has announced a support package. From April, households in lower valued homes, council tax bands A to D, get £150 knocked off their council tax. And from October, so 6 months after the April price rise, we get £200 off annual fuel bills, but that discount must be paid back via higher fuel bills in the future. Finally, the Warms Homes discount will be extended to 3 million lower income households. But let's get real here for a minute. For the vast majority of us, these measures will make little difference, by no means offsetting the huge rise in energy bills we face this April. So what can you do? Well, you can try to switch providers, but with the energy price cap rising across the board, getting a fixed price that doesn't reflect that increase is almost impossible. Ofgem urges those worried about paying to speak to their energy provider as soon as possible about a payment break or an alternative payment plan. You can check also if you are eligible for fuel-related benefits like the Warms Homes discount or the winter fuel payment. Also, charities like the National Debt Line may be able to secure you 60 days breathing space from debt repayments to get your finances sorted. Now, On the Money is your daily dose of economic, business and consumer news. We've said for months this cost of living crisis is coming, and now it's here, we're on your side. Millions of households facing an energy crisis, and for businesses, including the countless small firms that drive our economy, there is no energy price cap for them at all. So that's our On the Money question today. Spiralling fuel bills. How do households and firms cope? Today we're talking to Bill Esterton. He's a Shadow Minister and Labour MP for Sefton Central up there on Merseyside. Adam Scorers, the Chief Executive of National Energy Action, the perfect guest. That's a national charity working to end fuel poverty in the UK. And our regular economist, Vicky Price, who is, of course, Chief Economist at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. Bill, let's talk to you first. Up there on Merseyside, you're a well-known local MP. You talk to many constituents. To what extent is the fuel crisis now uppermost in their minds? And what can they do about it?
Well, thanks very much, Liam. I think the practical advice you gave just now was really sensible. I'm interested to hear what your other guests have to say about it. But you're quite right. The government and Rishi Sunak are putting forward a loan to the energy companies. It's got to be repaid by consumers. That's not even going to be available to businesses, and that's why Labour's got an alternative. We think it should be a VAT cut. VAT cut would cut £200 off energy bills, but wouldn't have to be repaid. So that's different for a start. It would help businesses as well. That's massively different for a start. We also think that you should extend the Warm Homes discount to 9.3 million households, which is significantly greater, and we're suggesting £400 there. And a £600 million fund for the energy-intensive industries, which are going to be really, really badly hit in manufacturing, steel, ceramics, glass, paper, cement are just five off the top of my head. And we think that that's what's really needed because, as you said, £700 extra on household bills, a fourfold increase in industrial energy prices. This is a cost of living crisis and a real crisis for costs in in business, and it needs serious action, and that's what we're putting forward.
Adam Scorer of the National Energy Action Charity. Bill has there just given us an answer across the piece, both households and firms, and of course he's right to do so. Both are hugely important to his constituents up there on Merseyside. You deal more with households, particularly lower income households. What can they do? We must be careful about giving financial advice, of course, on the television, but what's your general advice to people who ring you, often I would suggest, in dire straits?
Yeah, absolutely. And in huge distress. There's not much I can tell them. There's very little they can do as an active player in the energy market, switching to cheaper deals. We would say, as your advice said, certainly get in touch with your supplier. If you think you're going to struggle to pay, do get in touch. The earlier you do that, the better. There's a certain number of things they can do to help you. But let's be frank, the only opportunity that we had to mitigate, take the sting out, the pain of these energy price rises was for government. And their response was woefully inadequate. They decided to go broad and shallow, and they should have gone deep and targeted, and they will have to come back to that. They had an exam question. The exam question was, how do you stop energy price rises devastating the incomes of those on the poorest households? And they decided not to answer that question. They didn't even turn the question paper over. So the consequence is we have inadequate support to the poorest households. They will feel that in April. They will feel that financially, but also in their health and their well-being and their emotional lives. And government will have to come back to it, because what it's done so far is just woefully inadequate.
Let's just go back to Bill Esterson for a moment. I want to come to Vicky Price in a moment to talk about the bigger energy picture. But coming back to you, Bill, in that little bit of not so much financial advice, but guidance I tried to give our viewers and listeners at the top of the show, I did mention the Warms Homes discount, the winter fuel allowance that is being extended to 3 million households now. Are you advising constituents who may think that they don't qualify for benefits, previously comfortably off, as these April price rises come in, that they may in fact be eligible for some kind of benefit-related discount?
Well, thanks, Liam. In my 12 years as an MP, I've had a number of campaigns to try and encourage particularly pensioners to apply for all the benefits that they're entitled to. It's something that there's a really poor uptake, and I think this is never more important than right now, that people do look at what they're eligible for. But this is this really is woefully inadequate. I think that's exactly the right phrase. And it isn't just about energy bills. We know food prices are going up. We can all see that in the shops, in our weekly shop. And the national insurance rise is going to hit working people really, really hard in April at the same time. That's why it's so important that the government does take much stronger measures. And I'm afraid we've got a real cost of living squeeze, and unless there is support, just look at it this way: £54 on average extra a month for people on lower middle incomes is a really, really steep increase when you add in the cost of rises in food and in filling up your car, and that national insurance rise. I think a lot of people are going to really feel the pinch, and Rishi Sunak's going to need to come back and do far more. I'm afraid it just is not good enough what he's come forward with.
And just before we zoom out to Vicky for the bigger picture, if I may, Vicky, I just want to tap in a little bit more, Adam, to your frontline experience, if you like, there at the National Energy Action Charity. In your experience, if people do approach their energy providers for some kind of reprieve, some kind of payment plan or delay, we mustn't mention individual firms because they're not here to identify and defend themselves, but what's the attitude that people meet when they're in difficulty and they approach their energy provider and say, look, I just can't pay at the moment, I need to pay over stages?
Well, and of course, energy suppliers don't do this out of the kindness of their heart. They do it because regulatory requirements insist that they do try to come up with repayment plans, especially if households in debt, that meet the ability of the household to pay. And they'll try and do that as best they can. I think they're going to be overwhelmed, as we are, in terms of the numbers of calls and their ability to respond. So that's one thing. But do try it, because they are required to help you with your payment cycles. One thing on the warm home discount, rebate. Yeah, absolutely right. The first thing is people should make sure they get hold of all the support they can. But let's put that in context. The extension to 3 million households is not a crisis response. That was on the cards in summer. That's the result of a consultation in summer. It's a pre-crisis mechanism. And as bills have risen by £1,000 over the year, the value of the warm home discount rebate is going to be £10. It is entirely inadequate. The Chancellor made a decision not to go deep and targeted, not to try and help households on the lowest incomes, and we're going to pay a heavy price.
It doesn't even touch the sides, does it? And that's why we're so focused here on the money across GB News on this cost of living crisis, the reality of what many millions of households are now facing in April. Vicky, let's turn to you. We've heard from the two gentlemen there, constituency MP, an energy debt campaign charity head. Will these messages of really desperation be heard in Whitehall, do you think? You used to be one of the most senior economists in Whitehall. This is a really big issue, isn't it?
Well, what it's going to do, of course, is going to affect people's ability to spend, and that, of course, will slow down growth. So I think there is going to be attention paid to this, and we might see some changes taking place. Now, remember, of course, we're having benefits going up in April by just over 3%. Now, the Chancellor could increase those further because, of course, the way that they're done is they look at what the RPI was back in September, which
the
was a
retail
lot
price
lower.
index.
And, of course, that is now gone up quite significantly.
7.4%, I think, RPI inflation at the moment.
Indeed. So we might see some adjustment on that. But, of course, they're going to say, minimum wage going up, and it's true it's going up by 6.6%. And what happens to wages overall is still a big question mark. They are going up in some areas in particular, but you look at the whole of the public sector where, of course, you still have lots of pay freezes. One very quick thing, the manufacturers, of course, we always mentioned about energy-intensive sectors, but overall, they're all being affected, of course, by higher energy prices. What we're seeing is that they are trying to pass them on, and when output prices at the gate seem to be going up something like 12% now, that, of course, will reflect itself eventually in higher consumer prices too. So we're not over that.
We're going to talk to you about that, precisely that issue later in the show, inflation, business inflation, and the pass on to consumer price inflation. Let's go back to Bill Esterson. Bill, do you think the Chancellor's going to end up needing to do more when it comes to tackling this energy price crisis as firms start passing on their higher energy costs to consumers? That raises the cost of living across the board, making those fuel bills, that burden, even heavier for households.
Well, you've almost answered your own question. Unless he does, people are going to be in a really difficult situation, aren't they? And we shouldn't laugh about it because this is really, really serious for people being able to put food on the table. You have now already got people who are having to choose between heating and eating, and I'm afraid unless the Chancellor addresses it, that's going to get worse. And just to add, this may not be the last energy price rise either. There may be another one coming along in October. So I think unless there is action now, we're going to have a longer term squeeze on people's ability to afford their bills. Just something that Vicky was saying, I'm picking up from business groups. There's a lot of sectors where wages are not going up or certainly not keeping up with really quite high level of inflation. And that inflation rate is a real worry too. And which you're seeing coming through in food and fuel and energy prices as well, aren't you? And by the way, just to say, the plan I set out is fully costed because we've costed it by saying that we think that the oil and gas companies should pay for it. They're the ones benefiting from the high oil and gas prices that are feeding through to gas and electric. We feel that they should take their fair share of the burden, including with a windfall tax for that energy-intensive £600 million fund that I mentioned earlier.
You mentioned, Bill, inflation. The consumer price index, the official measure, that's at 5.4%. The retail price index, which includes housing costs, particularly rents that Vicky mentioned, the RPI, that's at 7.4%. A lot of people contact me saying the actual lived inflation they're facing in the shops is even higher than those official measures. Adam, let's give the last word to you. This is a difficult time. In no way does On the Money want to be scaremongering at all. We are trying to address the issues that ordinary people are facing up and down the country. We've tried to give a few points of reference, tips and ideas to the extent we can under broadcasting rules. We are going to return to this. I look forward to welcoming you back on the show as that April price rise approaches. What's your final piece of advice now to people who have listened to this discussion and are concerned?
Well, unfortunately, my piece of advice is to try and limit the damage as much as you can, either by your energy usage or talking to your energy suppliers or getting all the impact. But the hard truth is that this is an issue of huge urgency and drama, and it requires government to step in and do way more than they've done before, because it's right. We have an April price rise of £700. We will have another price rise in October. And so far, we have seen almost no willingness from government to understand the scale of the challenge, the consequences of the impact for households, and the appropriate proportionality of response that's required from government.
Well, we've had a good discussion. It doesn't help anybody pay their bills, but it certainly might give people a few ideas, strategies for what is coming. You've both all been extremely helpful. Bill Esterson, Shadow Labour Minister, and of course the MP for Sefton Central, Adam Scorer, Chief Exec of National Energy Action. We look forward to welcoming back you on the show. Your charity works to help end fuel poverty and Britain, and Vicky Price is going to stay with us. Thank you all for that important discussion. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan, on GB News Television and DAB Plus Digital Radio. It's 1:22. After the break, we'll be hearing from the managing director of a family-run smokehouse in the Yorkshire Dales to hear how his firm is coping with those rising energy costs. Stay with us. You're On the Money.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a fine Friday for most of us. Sunny spells, particularly in the east, turning cloudy in the west, with rain for some later. Well, that's the first of some fairly unsettled weather arriving for the weekend. You can see it stretching out there in the Atlantic, but ahead of all of that, a ridge of high pressure. That's led to a cold start to the day in many places, a widespread frost, but beautiful blue skies for much of the afternoon for many, particularly in the east, and for some central areas also, the sunshine clinging on. But towards the west, the clouds do tend to gather, and it does turn a bit more breezy for Northern Ireland and Western Scotland by the end of the afternoon. A cold feel to the day, but pleasant enough in any sunshine, 8 or 9 Celsius fairly widely. And then into the evening, you can see the start of that unsettled weather pushing into Northern Ireland, Northern and Western Scotland. Snow initially over the higher ground of Scotland and Northern England before it turns to rain more widely. Scotland, Northern Ireland seeing showers replace the rain by the end of the night, but the rain turning up by then into northwest England, West Wales as well. Now, with the cloud and the rain arriving, it's a generally frost-free night. A touch of frost possible in the east before the rain arrives, and then it turns milder as we go into the morning. And it's a bright start for East Anglia, for parts of the Midlands and the southeast. Breezy here, but elsewhere, outbreaks of rain. Showery for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but for Northern and Western England, much of Wales, the rain heavy and persistent at times. Nevertheless, a slightly milder day. You won't feel it, though, with that wind blowing, particularly around Irish Sea coast, where we'll see gales in exposed locations, and that wet weather just slowly sinks south during Saturday evening, easing for a time, but more rain to come on Sunday widely across England, Wales, central and southern Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland. Turns milder, but it will be windy.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:27. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. Now, we've been talking all things energy as we give you tips and ideas to beat the squeeze in the cost of living. Gas and electricity price caps are set to hit an all-time high in April. But it's worth stressing that there is no energy price cap for businesses. So they face even higher rises in energy costs. Costs, of course, which they will eventually pass on to consumers. I'm joined now by Charlie Alexander. He is Managing Director at Blakers, a family-run smokehouse in the Yorkshire Dales. Charlie's firm has struggled in the last quarter, dealing with high energy costs and inflated price for the fish that they smoke. Come April, when energy bills nearly double for some businesses, will small firms like Blakers be able to cope? Charlie, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us from Blakers.
No problem.
You hear a lot about this energy price cap going up for households, but businesses, they're not mentioned so much, are they?
No, sadly not. I'm faced with my bill's probably going to double, I've been told by my energy broker. So I currently pay £120,000 a year for my electricity. So going up to £240,000 a year will mean, obviously, my increase of £120,000. That means I either have to increase my sales by about 4%, or I have to put prices up by 1%. 120 grand, put it in perspective for a small business like myself, that would mean that my EBITDA would decrease by about 20% and my PBIT by 30%. So that's the impact it has on
before dividends. There's a little bit of technical jargon that's your earnings before dividends and taxation and so on. Look, 120 grand, that is a lot of cash. Charlie, you run a very decent business. It's got a good reputation. It's great to have you on the show. How concerned are you and the rest of the family? You've built this business over many years. You've got a fabulous local reputation. Could this sink you?
Well, I don't think it will. However, we've got to be very, very mindful of it and be very, very focused on our energy usage. We're already looking at a feasibility study of how we really manage the factory from an energy point of view. So we become more efficient, not only in a production point of view, but also the amount of electricity we consume, because we clearly need to minimise it. If I'm getting, by the way, my double is the best quote I can get at the moment when my current contract runs out. So who knows when I'm run out in November that if it's uncapped, it might be worse. So that's where I think my best case scenario is at the moment. So clearly we're planning for that. We're doing a lot of work with our maintenance department of how we can actually look at minimising the amount when the factory's not in use. We'll make sure that we're not using the chillers too much. Obviously, we smoke. We're using electricity to make our smokers work. So how can we maximise usage by better tariffs during the night and all that sort of thing, which potentially would increase our labour costs. So there's a whole balancing act to be done. But it's mindful of that. So it's not only am I exposed to this at 100% increase, probably at best, but I'm exposed to packaging increases, I'm exposed to distribution increases, but of course...
increases right across the supply chain. Charlie, ordinary householders, we try and sort out our bills at the kitchen table, don't we? Struggling at evenings and weekends. Obviously, you're running a serious business. You're looking at paying, you know, £250,000 in your electricity bill. You focus on this as you run your business. Does someone in your position, a small business but a substantial small business, do you have any kind of leverage when you ring up the energy firms, or are you absolutely at their mercy, like so many householders feel at the moment?
Yeah, we are, and we're uncapped at the moment, so I have no leverage whatsoever.
Shop around. There's no competition. There's no way you can play one provider off against another. You said you've got an energy agent. I mean, it's a professional service.
Who's been very good for us. You know, the rate we've got at the moment is very competitive. And so using that has really helped, because we're not experts in buying electricity, and you need to be these days, clearly. So recruiting an expert, I think it's certainly helped us. So we will trust them in finding the best deal for us from November with our current.
It strikes me, Charlie, just briefly at the end, the really big firms, you know, the big manufacturers, the big food processors, and so on. They can hedge, can't they? They can buy electricity forward. They can have proper trading desks to insulate themselves, even profit from spiking wholesale energy prices. Presumably, as a relatively small business, albeit a successful one, you don't have that. It strikes me here on The Money that it's the smaller firms that are really going to get hammered during this price spike.
Correct. Yeah, and remember, 99% of firms in the UK are SMEs.
Small and medium size, yeah. Charlie Alexander, absolutely fascinating to talk to you. Do stay in touch with us here on The Money as we approach this April price rise. Of course, the price rises are coming in for you all the time. Charlie Alexander there, Managing Director of Blaker's Smokehouse in the lovely Yorkshire Dales. It's 1:33. This is On The Money with me, Liam Halligan, on GB News TV and DAB Plus digital radio. Coming up, we'll be taking a look at those GDP figures as the UK economy grew by a whopping 7.5% last year. Plus, I'll be talking to Manchester's much-loved cabbie, John Constantine, on how fuel prices are affecting taxi drivers across the UK. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
It's 1:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary says the next Metropolitan Police Commissioner faces stark challenges as she begins the process of choosing Dame Cressida Dick's replacement. Priti Patel says the culture at the force and the behaviour of its officers needs an overhaul by a new leader. Dame Cressida announced her departure yesterday after losing the confidence of the London Mayor in the wake of a series of scandals. The Defence Secretary is in Moscow meeting his Russian counterpart today. Ben Wallace laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier earlier. He's hoping to make clear that Russia invading Ukraine would be a lose-lose situation. Meanwhile, President Biden is urging US citizens to leave Ukraine immediately. The US president's confirmed he won't send troops to rescue Americans if Russia invades. Mr. Biden's warned events in the region could escalate quickly. Labour MP Neil Coyle has had the party whip suspended after he allegedly made racist comments to a journalist. The Bermondsey and Old Southwark MP is accused of using offensive language towards British-Chinese reporter Henry Dyer in a bar in the House of Commons. Mr Coyle has apologised to everyone involved. Spain has dropped its entry requirement for British children over the age of 12 to be fully vaccinated. They'll now only have to provide proof of a recent negative COVID test. Meanwhile, fully vaccinated passengers will no longer need to take a test when arriving in the UK. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. We'll be back at the top of the hour with a full update. It's back to Liam and On The Money next. Don't go anywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:37 and you're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. Now, today's GDP figures are in, that is gross domestic product, the way we measure economic growth, the sum total of all transactions across the economy. GDP expanded by 7.5% in 2021. That's a big number. It's the fastest growth among all the G7 nations. That's the advanced industrial countries. But there was a sting in the tail, because those Omicron restrictions meant that GDP actually shrunk by 0.2% in December. So the economy grew in total last year at the fastest rate since the Second World War, since 1940, in fact. But that was largely because economic activity fell off a cliff during the 2020 lockdown. And meanwhile, inflation in the US just hit a whopping 7.5% on the official measure. That's the highest for 40 years. Are those rising price pressures set to cross the pond? Well, here to discuss is Vicky Price, Chief Economic Advisor at Centre for Economic and Business Research and On the Money regular. And another friend of the show is Julian Jessup, the former Treasury economist. Julian, great to have you with us, as ever. Happy Friday. Let's just talk a little bit about GDP before we move on to inflation. 7.5% is quite a big number. It's more than Rishi Sunak estimated in his budget back in the autumn. He said it would be 6.5%, but he's got 6% penciled in for 2022. Is he going to reach 6% this year?
Well, it's starting with the 2021 figures. Obviously, they are old news in one sense, but I still think it's worth stressing that they're good news. Growth last year was a lot stronger than people expected at the beginning of 2021. And also, we had monthly numbers for December today, which did show a small fall of 0.2%. But that also is a lot less than some people feared. It does suggest that the economy is going into 2022 a little bit stronger than some people had feared, including people like the Bank of England, who published forecasts a couple of weeks ago that are already looking too pessimistic. Looking forward to this year, though, yes, I think 6% is now more challenging, particularly with the cost of living crisis and the fact that the Chancellor is persisting with his crazy plan to raise national insurance. But I still think there's a good chance that the UK does better than expected this year, just as it did last year.
Vicky, to you, as Julian says, 7.5% is a big number. That's good news. More growth, more investment, more jobs. That helps everybody in these tough times. But there was a reduction in December because of those Omicron restrictions. It was constrained to the sort of service sector, hospitality and so on. Construction was still going gangbusters in December, and manufacturing.
Well, industrial production overall didn't do anything very much. In fact, it was sort of more or less flat in terms of its contribution to growth. But yes, it was services, people didn't go out. And of course, it affected consumer confidence as well quite significantly. So the question is it going to improve? But if you look at where we are now, nevertheless, by comparison to the pre-pandemic levels, in the quarter overall, we saw a 1% growth. But we're still...
This is October to December, the final quarter of 2021,
yes. Still 0.4% below pre-pandemic. In the month, we're about there now. But the interesting thing is that the greatest contribution to us being there is, in fact, spending on health and social care.
Yeah.
So, of course, we have had this massive growth, particularly the very successful sort of vaccination campaign that has taken place. This has used loads of resources.
Yeah.
So we have to be a little bit careful that a lot of the increase that we have seen in the economy has come from that.
From government.
From government.
From borrowed money.
Exactly. But of course, being spent in this particular case on getting the health of the economy to improve and give us a bit of grounding for the future. So that, of course, isn't going to be anything like as big in the future. At least one hopes there's going to be another crisis of that sort. And therefore, we're going to depend a lot more on the private sector really doing their bit, if you like, and the consumer going out and spending. And that's the question mark that we have facing right now.
Julian, back to you. Vicky makes a characteristically shrewd point, doesn't she? A lot of this 7.5% growth is because of government spending, money the government has borrowed. And if Rishi Sunak doesn't get his 6% growth this year in 2022, there'll be less tax revenue than expected. There'll be more benefit spending than expected. Borrowing will go up even more. And that's not great. The Bank of England could be forced to raise interest rates even more because of that higher borrowing.
Yeah, well, as ever, Vicky does make a very good point about what's happening to the spending in the health sector in particular. But I think there are swings and roundabouts here. One of the reasons why the UK saw such a relatively large fall in economic activity in 2020 is precisely because we were measuring the output of the public sector, education as well as the NHS more accurately than other countries. So we're sort of starting to see some of the benefit of that coming through. And of course, if GDP is supposed to be about economic welfare in some sense, the fact that we are spending more money on making people healthier as we come out of a pandemic, I think counts as GDP just as much as me spending money down the pub. So I think this is real growth and real benefit to the economy. Looking forward, you're absolutely right to flag up concerns about borrowing and debt. But ironically, the stronger growth that we saw in 2021 means that we're already paying more tax, both as individuals and companies, than we were expected to do. And borrowing has actually fallen more quickly than the OBR and the Chancellor had anticipated. So there's some wriggle room there for the Chancellor. He doesn't need to rush to raise taxes because borrowing's already coming in lower than he was forecasting.
Let's turn to inflation, Vicky. There's a UK inflation number coming out next week on Wednesday. We'll obviously be covering it here on The Money. We just had a US inflation number, came out last night, 7.5%, a lot higher than expected. And we've seen the impact of that on the money markets, pricing in higher UK interest rates to tackle inflation here than previously.
Yes, I think the markets have changed their minds about this whole inflation issue being just transitory. Yes, and of course yields are going up. They're going up everywhere, which means that long-term borrowing costs are going up for everybody, and that's the real problem. It's affecting us, it's affecting Europe, it's affecting everybody. And it's absolutely the case. Energy prices, of course, have been a major factor, but there are some special issues in different countries. We have that here as well, which is that car production is down to what we would have expected at this time of the year, and partly because of the move to electric, but so on. But because of that, and parts being difficult to get, second-hand car prices go up significantly. They've gone up here. In fact, they're a major part of what's going on in the States.
That's right.
So that is slowing down a little bit. So although we have seen this very substantial increase in the US, and there will, I think, be quite a big increase in interest rates, and others might follow, including us, of course, here. And the ECB, the Europeans, are beginning to change their minds as well.
Yeah.
So they might start raising rates earlier than we think. What you might nevertheless see is by the time they start doing it, that inflation peak has been reached, and some of those factors which are pushing inflation up now may
start to
down.
unwind over the summer and into the autumn, perhaps.
Yeah.
Julian, going back to you, US inflation 7.5%. It's a big number. When Uncle Sam sneezes, the rest of the world catches A cold is the phrase that economists often use. Do you think this is focusing minds now here in the UK, this bigger than expected UK inflation number ahead of our inflation number next Wednesday?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is very much a global phenomenon. Obviously, the US has just posted 7.5, but there are several European countries posting inflation rates of 7 or 8%, like Netherlands and Belgium. So this is a global phenomenon. And I think it's important in understanding why to look at the bigger picture. Obviously, the biggest increases are in things like energy and food, but the underlying driver of all of this is the enormous amounts of money that central banks, including the US central bank, have been pumping into the world economy over the last couple of years. And that is inevitably feeding through into higher prices now. So I think the onus is clearly going to be on central banks to start to withdraw some of that extraordinary support for the economy. But I think also a sense of context is important here. We're only talking about interest rates rising to maybe 1 or 2% over the next year or so in the UK and in the US. Now, that's higher than people have been used to over the last, say, 5 or 10 years. But it's still very low in historical terms. And measured relative to inflation, it's lower still. So I don't expect central banks to be slamming on the brakes, but they certainly need to do more to restore credibility.
Julian, just stay with us, and Vicky too, because I want to read out some emails and perhaps the three of us can react together to some of the GB News viewers and listeners' emails. Lots of you have been writing in about how the cost of living squeeze is affecting you. As I say, and I say this from my heart, viewers and listeners, we are on your side here on the money. We're going to carry on focusing on the cost of living squeeze, giving you tips and ideas to the extent that we're allowed to under broadcasting rules about how you can cope, offering you advice, bringing in expert opinion in order to help you get through. Now, Dawn says it's wrong that there are energy companies exempt from the price cap. We are not wealthy people, and it's caused us a lot of hardship. My husband is disabled. He's age 76, and he needs warmth. The winter fuel payment is rubbish. We live in the southwest, and it has to be a consecutive 7 nights at 0 degrees or below. Thanks for raising this important subject. You're welcome, Dawn. We will continue to do so. Fred says, in Canada, you have an option for gas and electricity billing to do something called equal billing, where your average bill is worked out and then you pay the same each month. Very interesting idea, worth exploring. I hope the Treasury is listening. Trevor says, I'm disappointed that the £200 loan, in inverted commas, we're all getting in the form of a discount with our October energy bill is being made compulsory. I realise it's interest-free, but for me personally, I would have liked to have had the option to opt out. Linda says, Liam, what's the agenda of those squeezing small and medium-sized businesses until they squeak? One has to ask who benefits from the current trajectory of rising prices and impoverishment of the majority of the population. Well, I'm sure for a lot of the energy firms, the agenda is survival, given the wholesale gas prices that they're facing. David says, cutting VAT for business costs nothing and helps no one. It's all reclaimable. Keep those emails coming. If you're feeling the squeeze this winter, write into gbviews@gbnews.uk and we'll read out more of those emails on the show. Julian, let's go back to you. Something that GB News viewers and listeners often contact me about is these renewable subsidies that are part of our household energy bills and indeed firm energy bills. Until quite recently, it was only nerdy people like us who realised that these subsidies were part of household energy bills rather than taken from general taxation. What are your thoughts in this area? Do you think the Treasury is going to have to rethink those renewable energy subsidies on household and business fuel bills as this cost of living squeeze tightens?
Well, I think they will. And there's already a start of a rethink. I think people are recognising that there's a stronger case now for looking again at nuclear power as a green fuel and a relatively secure source of energy as well. And the Treasury has already made some good noises around that. But it is striking, yes. It's a remarkable amount of the bill is not actually profits being made by energy suppliers. It's money going to the government in one form or another. And if the government wanted to, it could lop several £100s off bills, both by suspending VAT on energy and by cutting some of those environmental subsidies that actually are not particularly well targeted anyway. I personally think, though, that the best route to go down is to increase support for those people that need it most. I think that's one reasonable argument against a cut in VAT, is it would benefit both richer households as well as poorer households. But there is clearly more need for support for low-income households and also for smaller businesses. The government has done a little bit there, but I think it probably needs to do more. And I also agree with one of your viewers who pointed out that the so-called £200 discount is actually just a loan. On top of that, it doesn't come in until October, so that's no use if you're struggling to pay bills in the meantime.
My own suspicion, Julian, you talk to lots of people in Whitehall as I do, is that the Treasury left it so late to come up with this scheme, and the loan scheme clearly involves the energy companies. It was too late to implement it before April. I'd also slightly push back on your distinguished view. I would say we've been campaigning to scrap the VAT on energy bills here on the money. Yes, in some senses, it benefits everybody, but if you're a lower income household, you disproportionately spend more of your income on fuel, so the VAT cut would help you more. I agree, it's a finely balanced point. Vicky, let's go back to you. Until quite recently, if someone like me was arguing against renewable energy subsidies on household fuel bills, I'd be accused of, inciting a culture war. I'd be called some kind of, environmental global warming denier. Suddenly, that's a mainstream point of view, isn't it? That we should look at these renewable energy subsidies.
You can look at them again in terms of whether they are targeted the right way, which is one of the points that Julian was making. But the other thing is whether you should really get that out of normal general taxation rather than just the fuel bills. Of course, it's been an easy way to do it because you can just raise the money, through your electricity bills, which actually happens in terms of collecting taxes for particular purposes all across Europe. It's your electricity bill, which has all sorts of add-ons, which then go to various areas. Of course, you have to make sure they're hypothecated properly, they don't get wasted into...
So they are actually channeled into renewables.
Exactly.
That's what hypothecation means, isn't it? The money doesn't just disappear into a huge government pot. It goes where it's meant to be going, does what it says on the tin.
Indeed, but of course we have to bear in mind that subsidies have been that type of money being then used for subsidising renewables has been a major part of the whole renewable push that we have had, and the fact that we've really moved way ahead of many other countries in terms of the percentage that comes from renewables. And there was something very interesting that one of the people who sent the note, who sent in...
GB News viewers and listeners are always interested.
Which was about energy companies that are not subject to cap. They are only the ones that are completely green, or are green, with the percentage anyway that comes from green. Those which are really the green electricity firms which use just renewables to get to your home. They are the only ones that are not, in fact, subjected to the cap.
And talking to GB News viewers, by the magic of television, I know that a GB News viewer in Scotland just emailed in to say, spare a thought for us, because Nicola Sturgeon's made it mandatory we have to install 3 smoke detectors in our houses, average cost each £200. Julian, let's go back to you, if we may. This whole show has been about the cost of living crisis, giving people tips and advice on how they can beat the squeeze, particularly on their energy and fuel bills. We're not licensed to give financial advice specifically, of course, Julian, but what would be your general advice to households? We've talked about making sure you are or aren't eligible for benefits. We've talked about contacting your energy provider to try and come up with a prepayment or a staged payment plan. This is a really tough time for lots of households, isn't it?
It is. There's always one positive point to make, though, which, of course, the strength of the labour market, the huge number of vacancies in the economy, which means that if you're not going to get a pay rise from your current employers, now's actually not a bad time to be looking for a job with somebody else, or maybe even starting up your own business. So, in crises like this, sometimes you do get opportunities. And I think if your current employer isn't going to compensate you for rising fuel prices, then you should definitely look elsewhere. And you may well find that somebody else is willing to pay you more. So for those people that can switch jobs, then maybe that's one of the solutions.
Absolutely, well said. Julian Jessup there, former Treasury economist. Always good to have you on the show. You're always welcome, as of course are you. Vicky Price, Chief Economist at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. As ever here, on the money, grown-up conversations with people who really know their stuff. And that's all we got time for today. Thanks for joining me this week. We didn't manage to speak to John Constantine, Manchester's much-loved cabbie. He must have got a better fare. He's lost around Old Trafford. But he will be on our show next week. We desperately want to talk to him. Thanks for joining me today. We'll be back on Monday at 1 p.m. on The Money, continuing to focus on the cost of living crisis, helping you to beat the squeeze. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On The Money. Have a good weekend.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a fine Friday for most of us. Sunny spells, particularly in the east, turning cloudy in the west, with rain for some later. Well, that's the first of some fairly unsettled weather arriving for the weekend. You can see it stretching out there in the Atlantic, but ahead of all of that, a ridge of high pressure. That's led to a cold start to the day in many places. A widespread frost, but beautiful blue skies for much of the afternoon for many, particularly in the east and for some central areas also, the sunshine clinging on. But towards the west, the clouds do tend to gather and it does turn a bit more breezy for Northern Ireland and Western Scotland by the end of the afternoon. A cold feel to the day, but pleasant enough in any sunshine, 8 or 9 Celsius fairly widely. And then into the evening, you can see the start of that unsettled weather pushing into Northern Ireland, Northern and Western Scotland. Snow initially over the higher ground of Scotland, Northern England, before it turns to rain more widely. Scotland, Northern Ireland seeing showers replace the rain by the end of the night, but the rain turning up by then into northwest England, West Wales as well. Now, with the cloud and the rain arriving, it's a generally frost-free night. A touch of frost possible in the east before the rain arrives, and then it turns milder as we go into the morning. And it's a bright start for East Anglia, for parts of the Midlands and the southeast. Breezy here, but elsewhere, outbreaks of rain. Showery for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but for Northern and Western England, much of Wales, the rain heavy and persistent at times. Nevertheless, a slightly milder day. You won't feel it, though, with that wind blowing, particularly around Irish Sea coast, where we'll see gales in exposed locations, and that wet weather just slowly sinks south during Saturday evening, easing for a time, but more rain to come on Sunday widely across England, Wales, central and southern Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland. Turns milder, but it will be windy.
We've got a big Saturday for you on GB News. From 6 a.m, it's breakfast with Stephen and Anne. At 10, join Esther and Philip for the Saturday selection. Alistair, Darren and Nana take you through the day. And don't miss Neil Oliver Live at 7 p.m. At 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight, followed by Headliners. That's Saturday on GB News.
GB News.